Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Off the Bench. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson. And Pat, we've got our jazz intro back. Spooky season is over. We don't have the spooky background anymore. Sad times, but glad to be back to normal here.
Does Thanksgiving music exist?
No, it's funny. I was talking to my girlfriend about this the other day. Have you seen the ads for that
flex.
new big flex? Have you seen the ads for that new horror movie that's just called Thanksgiving?
No.
So I've been seeing it a lot. I think it's mostly when I'm watching wrestling, which is probably why you don't see it. It's been advertised on USA Network a fucking lot. And I've basically joked. I was like, somebody walked into a room and was like, there's no movies about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving really gets shorted on a lot of things. There's no Thanksgiving music. There's no
Despite
Thanksgiving
being
movies.
an elite holiday.
Despite being, it's a pretty integral holiday in America. It's kind of the lead up to Christmas. It's very much the lead up to Christmas, but there wasn't any real media for it. So I was like, somebody just walked in a room and was like, you know what? We need a movie about Thanksgiving. And they were like, great idea, Craig. What should we call it? Thanksgiving. You're a genius. So we've got that movie coming out, but that's kind of besides the point. Yeah, no Thanksgiving music to intro us. Maybe I could find something by, maybe it's just sounds of a cornucopia being banged on a fucking table or something. I don't know.
Music.
We'll just come in with some gobbling, just gobble sound effects right off the bat, and we'll gobble some things up. But Pat, we always start off here with a little recap of how our weeks went. How are we feeling in our main home fantasy league? It seems like I'm still rolling a little bit, but how are you feeling now?
I'm uneasy. I got to win. I needed to win. I broke 100 points in non-PPR, so that was a good week. That was despite starting Will Levis, who was very underwhelming. But I'm just more so concerned about my next week where, I guess we're going to talk about some of these guys that I'm going to have decisions on, but I don't love the chances for me next week. But I love the chances for the rest of the season, but I don't want to lose anymore. I'm 5-4. I'm giving myself one more loss here. I'd like to finish this year 8-5.
Yeah, no, it's the nice thing about our league. I mean, I say nice. I'm sure for you guys, this is not a good time. Look, I'm sitting on my little perch here over at 8-1. Again, I've said it before. I'll say it again. My team is good. I don't know that it's 8-1 good, but I'm going to take my record and run with it. For all of you folks there at around 5-4, the standings are clogged as shit. So it's like nobody's really out of it other than really two teams at this point are out of contention.
Hello,
Brett. And so, there's a lot of teams vying for the playoffs here, you being one of them, which is like, it's nice in one way and not so much in another way. Because, you'd feel pretty awful if you were staring up at like 3 7-win teams right now, and you're not. The next closest team after me at 8-1 is 6-3. You're only a game behind the 2 seed, essentially.
But
save
I'm
for
also
tiebreakers.
a game behind being well out.
Exactly.
The nice thing, though, is that I'm the second highest scorer in the league. So if push came to shove and it did come down to points, well, it would come down to head-to-head in most cases first. But if it ever came down to points, then I'd feel good about that. I just need to be in that position.
Absolutely. No, I think, we've talked about it before. Your team is still very, very good. Honestly, Pat, I'd be pretty surprised if your team didn't make the playoffs, but we have been surprised like that before. Sorry, just trying to jinx you a little bit.
That's why I'm not saying anything, because I know if I make a proclamation, it's not going to happen.
No, I have the luxury of being able to say that about other teams, just because, it's not
okay,
writing
fine.
on anything.
I'll say it, Bran. I think you're going to make the playoffs.
How dare you jinx me like that? I'm going to lose out now and go 8-5 and maybe still probably make. But
I think that would be good enough. I think that'd be good enough.
I think so too. Pat, you and I also we had a little feisty trade talk yesterday. We almost had one come to fruition, and then you cowardly backed out of it.
Yes, I
did. We were talking about potentially me sending Pat one of my gaggle of receivers for Isaiah Pacheco, because Pat is looking for a receiver to start this week who is not Chris Godwin and has a surplus of running backs. But I don't blame you for not wanting to do it.
Knee is just intact. I don't even have to worry about that. That would be a good hope too. But
yeah, I don't blame you for not wanting to do it. But look, that's the behind the scenes for you folks listening and viewing at home. But Pat, let's get into some non-personal things here. Although I guess this one is a little personal. Pat, the biggest news from this past week since the last time we recorded was the Raiders firing everyone. How are you feeling right now as a Raiders fan?
So just to put yourself in this position, it was, of course it happened Tuesday night into Wednesday morning when right after this. But Picture me, 1 a.m, sitting on my toilet, and just refreshing Twitter, and like I did like a cartoonish gasp, like when I saw it, like I was like baffled. My mood just like went through the fucking roof. It's just how good I felt in that moment.
Yep.
This clown is gone. You can say a lot of shit about Mark Davis, and I'm going to sling some shit at Mark Davis right now. But the one thing I can give him the credit for is he understood that this needed to happen for this team to have any viability. And they're 5-5, and with two very winnable games that they threw away. There is a world where the Raiders are 6-4 or even 7-3, which is terrifying. But so for him to finally just admit his faults and say, like, I fucked up. I hired the wrong guy, and he's making good for it. And I hope Mark Davis takes a lesson from 2 years ago when he did not keep Rich Bisaccia, which apparently, according to Mike Florio, he was never going to. Bisaccia was never truly a candidate.
We heard that from the beginning. That was part of the problem, is we knew that no matter how well he was coaching, we kept hearing that they were probably going to be looking externally regardless.
Which sucked for multiple reasons, because I think we've mentioned this before, but Rich Bisaccia is the uncle of our friend Cal. He manages my band, Nichols Outside Official, on all social media platforms. But what was I talking about? I did the plug, and now so Bisaccia. So Mike Florio said they were just never going to hire him. I really hope that Mark Davis gives Antonio Pierce a fair shake, because it's obviously the straw that broke the camel's back was that he rallied the team. They were against McDaniels. McDaniels kind of killed the vibe, said, "Don't you dare talk about my Patriots," like that. Mm-hmm. If that is true, that is wild, and it seems to be true. I mean, Jay Glazer, people who have reported, solid reporters reported that. I hope he gives Antonio Pierce the chance, regardless of how this season goes. But more so on Josh McDaniels. This has got to be 3 strikes and you're out, because I count the Colts as a strike. I agree. He failed miserably in Denver. He failed miserably in St. Louis as an offensive coordinator the next year, and then he spurned Indy, which I guess it worked out for them in the long run. I mean, they've got Shane Steichen, Josh McDaniels is sitting at home.
Yeah.
And now this, where it was clear that he wanted to be Bill Belichick. He wanted to run the Patriots of the West with Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, come on. Like, what he had in mind, what he wanted to do was never going to work in this situation. And some of the decisions he made, like the decision he made earlier in the year when they were down 8 to kick a field goal, and very winnable game that they just threw away for God knows what reason there. But his decision making, his personnel decisions, same with Dave Ziegler. You're not off the hook either, my man. But I like the future, because I think Antonio Pierce could be their head coach in the going forward. God, I'm forgetting their new general manager's name. Oh, Champ Kelly. He's had interviews around the league. Like, it's not like he is just the interim guy here. He could realistically be that GM. Like, this could be a tandem for the future. I do hate that they're going to have to tear it down for the most part again. Obviously, well, maybe Pierce will want to keep a lot of these guys because it's kind of in his system. That was the real reason why I wanted them to bring Bisaccia back, was just for continuity's sake. Keep Derek Carr, keep Devontae Adams, keep everybody happy. But this is a great moment. This is a great moment that this absolute bozo, like rest in piss bozo, have fun as a consultant in New England.
Yeah, it's coming.
It's coming for sure, but it'll be interesting to see how the Raiders do. They looked great this week, granted, against a very, very, very bad Giants team. We'll talk about that. But 8 sacks, great. Doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. Well, it does, but, quarterback, they sacked them 8 times. They scored 30 points, whatever. They looked great, and I'm not expecting a lot out of this team, but I just want to see them playing hard. They were lifeless under Josh McDaniels. They were a lifeless, identityless team. I just want to see some fight in them. They're not going to get a super high pick anyway, so win as many fucking games as you can.
Yeah, it was a sweep that needed to be done. They needed to get everyone at the top out of there. It's just Josh McDaniels just has a fundamental misunderstanding of how to run a football team. Like you said, going in with the vision and the idea that you were going to have Jimmy Garoppolo run whatever offense you were planning to run is a terrible idea. I saw I believe it was Theo Ash on TikTok and had put it pretty succinctly. He was like, Josh McDaniels has an ego where it's like, I want to run my offense, and I only need a quarterback that is capable of running my offense, and that's Jimmy G. And it's like, no, you need the kind of player that can actually make plays off script because your script isn't very good. And that's basically what it comes down to with Josh McDaniels.
He just wanted to be Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay.
Yeah.
That is not you.
Yeah,
that is not
unfortunately
you. You do
for
not have
him,
Tom Brady right now.
No, and he has failed time after time as a head coach. I will say he's probably got, the most risk-free ability to take other jobs because, like we've talked about, he's probably heading back to New England. That's always just his home base. And look, I'm not saying he's unfit to be in the NFL. Obviously, we've seen him be a successful offensive coordinator pretty much exclusively with New England, but he's the kind of guy that you kind of just need to throw in a room, let him come up with his offensive game plans, go out there and execute them, but don't give him any more power than is absolutely necessary. So an absolutely good move for the Raiders to move on from Josh McDaniels. And I'm excited to see how the rest of their season plays out now that they are, actually a little bit motivated. Pat, some big news coming here real quick. I mean, we don't really have to spend too much time on it, but we do have to mention it. The Rams have finally gotten our pal Carson Wentz off the streets. They brought him in. They saw Brett Rippon play one game and said, that's enough. So they brought in Carson Wentz. Look, it's one of those things where it's a big name, but it's an inconsequential move for the most part. It's just Matthew Stafford's expected to be back in relatively short order. So what I do look at it as is teams and the Rams specifically understanding that backup quarterbacks are important. So look, for as bad as Carson Wentz has been in his stretches as a starter, he's still probably one of the higher end backups you could have in the NFL still.
He's at least proven.
He's at least proven something. Brett Rippon has proven nothing. So it's enough.
Assuming Stafford comes back week 10, it is inconsequential, but what if something else happens? He's got hurt last year too. That does boost that whole offense if Carson Wentz is there. Like, say what you will about Carson Wentz, I don't think he's going to come out and be as good as Matthew Stafford, but he will boost Cooper Kupp. He would boost Puka, and obviously whatever gaggle of running backs are there too. But something that was not happening with Brett Rippon, they looked putrid against a bad team. The Packers are not good, and they looked awful. That's 2 straight weeks now where they have looked miserable with Brett Rippon at the helm. So they had to do it. Enjoy your bye. Figure it the fuck out. And come back, because Puka, we need you. We need you, Puka.
You need Puka. Yeah, no, this bye is coming at a perfect time for the Rams. They absolutely need it. Smart move for them, I think, to bring in another quarterback that's not Brett Rippon because, like you said, you never know what's going to happen. But, Pat, let's move on to some of the more consequential fantasy happenings from this past week. Look, obviously the Raiders are something personal to you, and then we had to get the Carson Wentz news off. But these are kind of the biggest performances, whether good or bad, from this past week. And we will start with my guy, C.J. Stroud. Did not see this one coming. Look, I made a trade a few weeks ago to get rid of Justin Fields, partially because I had at least somewhat faith in C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud laid an egg against the Carolina Panthers. I kept him in because who else am I going to start? I'm still going to keep riding with him. And, man, 41.8 fantasy points, 470 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, a monumental day for C.J. Stroud, and it has us reevaluating the entire fantasy landscape for the Houston Texans.
They had 4 receivers that had great days. Tank Dell popped off again. Nico Collins had a touchdown. Noah Brown hit over 100 yards. Dalton Schultz had a bunch of catches. Like, if you were a pass catcher on that team, not named Robert Woods, you were feeling good about life. And obviously they didn't run the ball well because they had Devin Singletary, but
they haven't all year. Yeah,
just baffling how good he's been, especially after people kind of saw him as the weak link of the 3 early round rookies in the preseason.
Right.
But he has, just blown Bryce Young out of the water here with how good he has been. And Young he's been okay. That team's not good. He's been tepid is a word I would use. He could be worse. But Stroud has looked amazing, and that's why this Texans team is not, a basement dweller like a lot of people thought they would be.
No, CJ Stroud, just a ridiculous performance that I don't think anybody saw coming. And look, obviously it's too early to make these judgments, but the early returns say that maybe Stroud could have been the pick over Bryce Young. Who knows? Texans fans either way are happy with who they got.
I still have faith in Bryce Young.
Yeah,
in the long
I
term.
do.
That team has a lot of
too.
stuff to figure out. Their defense is putrid.
Yeah, definitely some things can be improved around Bryce Young to improve his overall performance. But Pat, yeah, you were talking about the wide receivers going off and just the weapons on the Texans in general. This week in PPR leagues, the Texans produced the wide receiver 1, the wide receiver 3, the wide receiver 13, and the tight end 1. Like, that is unheard of. And so I think it's important, though, to think about that and how unlikely that is to happen in future weeks. So look, CJ Stroud's a stud. Several of these Texans weapons are either, I won't say they're all studs. I'll say they are pretty much all startable guys. Well, not Noah Brown. They're startable guys. There's a lot of startable weapons on this Texans team, but it's time to evaluate exactly what we can expect from these guys going forward. I think the important thing to understand is there's not always going to be a 470-yard, 5-touchdown pie for all these guys to eat from. There's just not going to be that. So when you look at a guy like Noah Brown, who was the wide receiver 3 that I mentioned, I believe he went for like 140 yards and a touchdown or something. It's just, I'll put it this way. I'm not personally worried about Noah Brown and picking him up on waivers or anything like that. I feel as though he's not going to go away from a real life perspective. You're going to keep hearing his name every Sunday when you tune into Red Zone, but it's not going to be a consistent thing. He's not going to be a consistent performer. And I think you're going to give yourself a headache if you try to, plug and play the guy who's probably at best 4th in this pecking order most of the time. But as far as the other Texans weapons, most of whom I have some stock in, obviously. Nico Collins, I think, is kind of the safe baseline play, the safest one that you can really get. I mean, he's been the more consistent of their receivers.
Yeah.
Tank Dell has been the one that either kind of scores over 20 or under 10 basically every week. So I don't really know exactly what to do with him. I think I'm in a weird spot because I'm currently slated to start both him and Nico, and I feel like I have way too much stock in the Texans at that point because if they just have an uncharacteristically down game regardless of matchup, then I'm in trouble. And then Dalton Schultz, I think Dalton Schultz is probably a startable tight end the rest of the way, but yeah, I think there are good days ahead for the Texans, absolutely, but I would just say it should go without saying, don't look at what they all did this past week as being like a sign of things to come for all of them, at least.
Yeah, obviously we're going to see these outburst games from them, but you can even, looking last week, like you said, they lost to the Panthers and they looked awful. Stroud 16-24 for 140 yards. Nico Collins had 4 for 30. Tank Dell had 3 for 16. Like, these are Dalton Schultz 2 for 5. Like, these are not good lines. And that was why, we talked about, possibly in a trade, either of these guys. And my concern was just the inconsistency, where it's like, I need consistency on my team, and they're not going to give me that, especially in a non-PPR league. But I've got a couple leagues where I'm just ravaged by buys, so I've got to start both of them. And you've just got to sit back and cross your fingers here that they're going to be able to pull it off. And, the one thing I will say, they're at Cincinnati, so you think with how good the Bengals have looked, they're going to be playing from behind. They're going to need to throw the ball. They're going to need to keep up. So I'm not expecting this, but I feel like with a little confidence, you could start these guys this week.
Yeah, I think, look, all the players I mentioned, minus Noah Brown, they are all startable. Like, if you have any of these guys and you are wondering if you should start them, yeah, I think individually they are all starts pretty much on a weekly basis here going forward. Look, Robert Woods, when he gets back, that will throw a slight wrench into things because I don't know how exactly that's going to affect Tank Dell's playing time specifically, but I have pretty strong faith that, seeing the connection between Tank and Stroud, we've talked about how Tank was like, get me to Houston. I just think everything is there internally for that relationship to continue to grow and continue to produce points most of the time, to where I'm not super worried about Robert Woods, but Robert Woods isn't going to disappear either when he gets healthy. So I think if you have any of these guys, you can start them.
Even beyond this year, we're going to hear Stroud to Tank Dell for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm at a point where, look, I acquired all these players at different points. Like, I drafted Nico, and then I claimed CJ Stroud, and then I claimed Tank in a week after that. So it's like I've stumbled upon all these guys at different points, and now I'm in a position where I can, and like, evaluating each player from an individual perspective suggests I should start all of them. But then it's like, it's so scary to do that. It's like, okay, I want to pull one of them out, one of the receivers that is, but then who do I put in? Like, do I put in Dalton Kincaid? Do I put in Jordan Addison? Do I put in Calvin Ridley? It's a mess. But look, I guess it's a good problem to have, guys who are putting up a good amount of points, albeit sporadically. You want to have guys that put up points, and the Texans are certainly putting up points.
You should start Dalton Kincaid.
I probably should, but also Sam Laporta. Look, my team is all rookies as well, by the way. If you guys haven't caught on to that, I mentioned it last week. Yeah, my team is just all rookies. I could start 2 tight ends. That is not a bad idea. But Pat, speaking of rookies, another rookie that's caught quite a few headlines and another player that's personal to me, but this guy's catching the wrong kind of headlines due to his coach. It's Bijan Robinson, but the guy I want to talk about mainly is the guy at the crux of this issue, and that's Arthur Smith. Pat, Arthur Smith and the Atlanta Falcons just lost to the Minnesota Vikings, who had Josh Dobbs come in, not know the playbook, not know his teammates' last names, and you get Arthur Smith.
Didn't know the cadences. Did you see that video of them going over the cadences? That was fascinating. That was wild.
Yes, and it's all a testament to how smart of a guy Josh Dobbs is. I mean, look, aerospace engineering major at Tennessee. Yeah. This is not a surprise that he was able to work through those issues, but it's still a terrible look for Arthur Smith and the Falcons to lose to a team in those tough circumstances. And the part of the reason they lost is because Arthur Smith continues to overthink the shit out of everything he does on the football field. I went on a rant about this a little bit last week, but Pat, it just gets worse and worse every week. And I feel like it's almost deja vu because last year this was all Kyle Pitts centric, but I am putting all the heat on just Arthur Smith now being a complete weirdo to the detriment of himself and basically all of his players. Like this whole, and I struggle to be like, okay, he has a vendetta against fantasy football players because there's just no way that's true, right? There's no way an NFL coach can actually care about spiting fantasy football players to the point where it affects his game plan. But
there's clearly resentment, but yeah.
There is resentment, but it's like, what other reason is causing him to be so delusional in the way he calls a football game? It doesn't make any sense.
That's the thing. That's the thing. It's like, I don't think just fantasy managers think it. Like Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, these are all guys with huge draft capital. Like you could, if you wanted to just, hand the ball to Tyler Algier or run a jet sweep with Jonnu Smith, you could have drafted offensive linemen. You could have drafted defensive players, but you drafted these 3 offensive weapons to not use them. And you're not winning games in in the most winnable division in the league.
Yeah. And it's at a point now where, you don't have the excuse of we're just here to win football games. You're not winning the games. You just lost a very, very embarrassing game to a shorthanded, undermanned Vikings team. And they were also getting carved up by Jaren Hall before Dobbs even came in. But it's just been an embarrassing performance from Atlanta lately to the point where, Pat, I think, look, let's address Bijan Robinson owners, that being myself included. But I think they're the ones that...
I've got him in 2.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of Bijan owners out there. There's a lot of people that had a lot of stock in Bijan Robinson, and they're wondering, what exactly do we do? Let me get this quote out there first, where Arthur Smith talked about Bijan Robinson and said, his impact away from the ball can open things up. Just shows you his mindset that he is stupid, to be quite honest with you.
What is this, basketball?
He's more focused on how good of a blocker and decoy Bijan is what it sounds like.
What in the Kyle Korver is that?
It doesn't make sense. And then this stat from JJ Zachariason on Twitter, one of the best follows you can find for fantasy football data at Late Round QB.
Thread after the games.
Great weekly thread with his data dump, and this is ripped right from there. Bijan Robinson has seen a sub 50% running back share in 4 of his last 5 games. So less than half of the running back touches on this team for Bijan Robinson, that of course being in favor of Tyler Algier and here and there Cordero Patterson. It's a mess, Pat. And Jonnu Smith with the jet sweep. This is what it comes down to for the Falcons, and this is what it comes down to for Bijan Robinson owners, and this is what we have to hope for. We need to hope that Arthur Smith starts getting scared and it starts coaching for his job, because although they're only a game out of first place, it's been a terrible show for them in most of their games. Even their wins, most of their wins have been by 3 points or less. We need Arthur Smith to fear for his job to the point where he gets rid of this weird little tendency or vendetta he has against using his best players. And here's why I think it's feasible that he could start fearing for his job. Pat, the Falcons head coach prior to Arthur Smith was Dan Quinn. His tenure with the Falcons went as follows. He went 8-8 in his first year, 11-5 and lost the Super Bowl, of course, notoriously to the Patriots. But look, he made the Super Bowl, right? Year after that, 10-6 and won a playoff game in the wild card round before losing in the divisional round. So again, another moderately successful season. You won a playoff game. But right after that, 7-9, 7-9, fired. All it took after winning a playoff game was back-to-back 7-9 seasons for the Falcons to say, we're going to move on from Dan Quinn. And I understand the expectations then may have been a little higher than they are right now because they had Matt Ryan at quarterback. But with the way the Falcons have spent in free agency and the moves they've made to try to be competitive, it tells me that expectations aren't necessarily low right now either, even with questionable quarterbacks like Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke. So let's take that and apply it to Arthur Smith. Like I just said, back-to-back 7-9 seasons got Dan Quinn fired immediately after winning a playoff game the season before. Arthur Smith has gone 7-10, 7-10, and is in the midst of another season where it looks like 7-10 is a highly probable outcome, or at least around there. Maybe a game better, maybe a game worse. If he underperforms this year, he may be out of a job. And it's a hope, Pat, but it's maybe a glimmer of hope that we can look at, that he will take a look at the overall big picture and realize the one way he can keep his job, potentially, is to use his good players to win games. It shouldn't be rocket science, but it is to him. So that's
you keep your job by winning football games, and if they were winning games, or even like winning enough games, if they they're 4-5, if they were 6-3 right now, we're singing a whole different tune because that's going to be more than enough to win the NFC South, but. Yeah, it is really frustrating, and I guess as a Bijan owner in 2 full PPR leagues, I'm still starting him. I'm not sitting him because he's averaging like five targets a game. He's averaging 5 targets a game. Like that's pretty significant for a running back, and we've still seen them get creative with him. Not as creative as Jonnu Smith, but who won me a league, by the way, last week. Thank you, Jonnu. George Kittle bye. I had to throw a Hail Mary to fucking Jonnu Smith, and he carried me. But Bijan, this feels like one of these situations where you get tired of him, you bench him, and then he pops off. He has had a couple good games, but it's been really, really, really frustrating.
Yeah, I'm at a point where I can't bench Bijan Robinson. I do not have the depth to do so unless I'm going to start Zach Charbonnet or somebody off the waiver wire. So yeah, you're throwing Bijan out there. I think you're going to continue to do so, and that's the thing. He still generally puts up at least RB2 numbers. This past week was a different story. This was a really bad game in which he also fumbled. But I think most of the time against bad defenses, he's at least going to give you, RB2 sort of production. But they need to be using the guy like a workhorse if they actually want to take the season seriously and win games, or, at least give him more than under 50% of the running back rush share. Yeah. Like that's insane. The way the Falcons have been for years is insane. And Pat, I tweeted this out too. It makes even less sense when you remember that Arthur Smith was the Titans offensive coordinator in 2019 and 2020 when they fed Derrick Henry the ball 300 plus times in each of those seasons. I understand Artie was the coordinator back then, and so you don't necessarily have the liberties that you do as a head coach to enact your own philosophies. Like I'm sure he was just carrying out, whatever Mike Vrabel wanted to do and was just, putting in his game plan essentially and then calling the plays. But it's fascinating to me that with how successful those Titans teams were, top 10 offense in both of those years, that he's now doing the exact opposite. He succeeded giving the ball to his best player as much as possible. And now he's not succeeding because he's not doing that. I don't know. I'm fascinated that this continues to be an issue for Arthur Smith, and I think it's going to continue to be an issue potentially all the way until he is out of a job in Atlanta. I hope it doesn't come to that for a lot of reasons, but we'll have to see how it plays out. That's the hope for Bijan owners, though, is that some kind of epiphany hits him. That's the hope for Bijan owners, Kyle Pitts owners, Drake London owners, and everybody, that this guy starts to look in the mirror and realize that his days in Atlanta could be numbered if he stops being such a stubborn weirdo that thinks he knows better than everyone else.
As long as Jonnu Smith keeps producing, he'll be all right.
Yeah, we'll draw up some more Wildcat snaps for Jonnu Smith, but other than that, we got to get Bijan more involved. Pat, let's talk about the other side of that game. So we talked about Josh Dobbs coming in and leading the Vikings to just a incredibly impressive win. Even with the incompetence of Arthur Smith, the fact that he was able to come in there and perform the way he did, nothing short of remarkable. But again, very smart guy. I think now we have to reevaluate what exactly we think of the Vikings and of their skill players for the rest of the year, because we were extremely worried, and it's still a worry, that Kirk Cousins, is no longer under center. You don't have the passing volume. You don't have one of the most willing passers, especially downfield in the NFL, like you do when you have Kirk Cousins. But Josh Dobbs looks to be competent again, at least from a propping guys fantasy numbers up perspective. Where are you at in how you're evaluating all the Vikings pass catchers, especially Jordan Addison, another rookie who I have very close to my heart?
See, I think that's the thing as a backup quarterback. You don't need to replace what your starter was doing. You just need to be serviceable enough to, keep it there. And obviously, Jaren Hall, we were a little worried just because we didn't know what to expect. Who knew what to expect from Jaren Hall? But with Josh Dobbs, we've seen him, albeit not be great, but I think he can do that. I think he can be that minimum line where it's like what you need to prop guys up. I don't own a lot of Vikings, but just like if Justin Jefferson does come back, I'm not worried about Justin Jefferson in the same way that we would have been worried about Cooper Kupp with Brett Rippon in any kind of long run. But I also think is more so Dobbs himself as a fantasy player is because obviously he can run. We've seen him run, and their running game is bad. Alexander Madison is bad, and no Cam Akers now. Poor Cam Akers, by the way. That's
brutal. But, absolutely brutal. Another Achilles injury.
So, like you said, there might be a good amount of passing volume just because they need to, because they can't run the ball. But yeah, if I was a Vikings if I was an owner of any Vikings, I would feel better than I feel about Jaren Hall or Nick Mullins or anybody, Sean Mannion. But yeah, I'm more so interested in what Dobbs is going to do. In still a quarterback. The quarterbacks are getting better now. We're seeing some better quarterback performances here, but I think him more so is going to put himself on the fantasy radar as well.
Yeah, Josh Dobbs actually was already QB 12 coming into this week, even though he got shipped off for basically a bag of peanuts. And yeah, he's absolutely going to be relevant. The way he plays and, adding that value with his legs has been huge. He's a very low floor player as well, because I found that when he doesn't add a rushing touchdown, his fantasy point total ends up being pretty meager, but you'd be hard-pressed to find an NFL team around the league that is more likely to produce rushing touchdowns for the quarterback than the Vikings, because, like you said, their run game is so bad. They are going to need some help from him on the ground just to move the ball. Yeah, I feel a little better as a Jordan Addison owner. I was panicking just a little bit. Look, 5 catches for 52 yards, I think, was what Addison ended up finishing with this past week. Yep. It's nothing that's going to blow you away, but it's also a reasonable building block considering Josh Dobbs did not know his last name or the playbook at all coming into the game. So I'm a little more optimistic, and I think if you own any Vikings pass catcher, including the eventually returning Justin Jefferson, we assume, you feel a lot better about it after seeing what Dobbs just did this past week. Pat, talk about Jordan Addison. He's a rookie. Got another rookie here. Lots of rookies so far. Dalton Kincaid. Let's get kinky. We're getting so kinky out here. This guy is breaking out to just a remarkable degree. I'm assuming he's not really on too many waiver wires out there anymore, but if he is, you better blow your load to go get him if you possibly can.
He is available in 0 serious leagues.
Yeah, exactly. But look, if you're in a somewhat non-serious league, or if you're in a league with a bunch of old men who don't really know what they're doing, go double check for Dalton Kincaid, because this guy, Pat, I don't think it's an overstatement to say he might be a top 5 tight end for the rest of the season, because what we've seen over the past 3 weeks, it indicates he could be.
I don't remember exactly what my take was last week. I might have said top 5 the rest of the way. I might have said he might I think I said he might finish as like the tight end 5 in PPR. Like that's how.
You did say it was something about where he would finish. Yeah,
like that's how much I like Dalton Kincaid, and then he absolutely backed that right up. And he is, despite the fact that we've also seen Khalil Shakir kind of come on, is like you see him at the top of the waiver wires in a lot of leagues, but. We've seen him come on, but Dalton Kincaid is the number 2 target in that offense behind Stephon Diggs. And they don't run the ball. You look at that box score from Sunday night, they barely ran the ball at all. So that's an incredibly high volume passing offense. And if you're the second target in that, and you're a matchup nightmare, you're a big guy at tight end lining up in the slot against either a safety or a linebacker, like linebackers can't. It was always. I'm not comparing him to Rob Gronkowski, please. But that was a.
Pat says Dalton Kincaid is better than Rob Gronkowski.
Probably smarter, but that was the whole thing. Is that like he was too big for safeties and too quick for linebackers. So he's just a matchup problem. And obviously it took them a while to incorporate it the way a lot of people thought they would going into the season. There was a lot of talk of him lining up in the slot, and like he always had the numbers, the participation, the snaps, the targets were all great, but no production. Now he's got that. That's getting better, and the production is there. All aboard. Like, I've already been on board. I've been the conductor, but we are chugging along on the Dalton Kincaid hype train.
Pat, I'm very much at a point where I wish you did not have Mark Andrews in our fantasy league because, God, I want to trade you Dalton Kincaid so bad. I do not need both Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta on my team, but I'm probably going to head into our stretch run with both of them.
Like I said last week, I was kind of tepid to say it, but I won't say in terms of finishing, but I will say through the rest of the season, I do think Dalton Kincaid will outscore Sam Laporta. Just based on the more volume. Okay. While Laporta seems to be a little more touchdown dependent, which, again, all tight ends are. But if anything, I feel like, because we've seen Laporta have like 3 catches, but he catches a touchdown. Kincaid last week, 7 catches, 8 catches, and we're seeing the yardage, and we're seeing the touchdowns. So I'd say from here on out, I would rather have Kincaid than Laporta, but I genuinely think you can start both of those guys.
Yeah, it's another interesting thing about a non-PPR league. Those touchdowns with Laporta are what we're looking for. And Kincaid has been kind of shorted in the touchdown department so far. So just to dive into his line from this past week, 11 targets, led the Bills. Stephon Diggs was second in targets with 7 in this particular game. That won't generally be the case, but still a good amount of targets for Dalton Kincaid. 11 of them en route to a 10-catch, 81-yard day. He also went down at the 2-yard line after going down at the 1-yard line last week. So we could be looking at some really big performances the last couple of weeks.
Ross St. Brown looking ass.
I know. I feel like, who was it? Somebody did that like an insane amount of times one year. It was like Des Bryant.
It was St. Brown last year.
Was it? Oh, St. Brown
St.
last
Brown
year.
had like 11 at the 1-yard line, and Jamal Williams scored on like 7 of them.
Oh, so that's right. That's what propped up dumbass Jamal. God, I love Jamal Williams, but as a person, but just that fantasy season was ridiculous. I don't understand that. Anyway, back to the point. Yeah, Dalton Kincaid, monster games. Could have been even better if he got either of those touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. God willing, he could have got both. But he is also the second highest targeted tight end over the last 3 weeks, behind TJ Hawkinson and ahead of Travis Kelce. I mean, if that doesn't scream elite usage, I don't know what does. And yeah, I think I'm at an interesting point trying to pick between him and Laporta, because Laporta, while he is touchdown dependent, he's also the guy that gets the touchdowns. He finds the end zone. He's looked at in those situations. Kincaid has yet to convert in those ones, whereas also you got to worry about Josh Allen taking some of those touchdowns. That's exactly what happened when Kincaid went down at the 2 this past week. Josh Allen ended up running it in on the next play. So
we also play in a non-PPR league.
Yeah.
If we're talking PPR, I'm like completely confident in the Kincaid over Laporta take. But non-PPR, it's not, because if Kincaid is a great, 8 for 81, that's a great line. And the fact that that's only 8 points just makes me mad. It makes me mad.
I know.
But yeah, then you're possibly looking at some more duds where, if he has a rough day, like 6 for 40, in non-PPR, that's not a great game. But in PPR, that's 10 points for tight end. That's fine. So, again, if you're just a smart person, a rational person, and you play in a PPR league, you will find no issues with Dalton Kincaid the rest of the way.
Yeah, Dalton Kincaid is an every week starter for every fantasy team that doesn't have Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, or Mark Andrews. And then, you get to Laporta, and you can make the argument either way. But again, PPR leagues, the edge probably does go to
it's crazy, though,
Kincaid.
How rookie tight ends have just never succeeded, and now we'll have potentially two top 5 options by the end of the year.
Pat, it's funny because sometimes those stats like that just kind of ignore context. Like, this was viewed as one of the strongest tight end classes ever. So, if any class is going to break that mold of no rookie tight end is ever good, it would have been this one. Now, did we think there would be 2 potentially top 5 tight ends for the fantasy season coming in? Absolutely not. But if there was ever going to be some kind of trend breaker like that, it would have been this year. And it turns out that
and we've seen Jake Ferguson has looked pretty good. Oh no, he's not a rookie. Excuse me,
not a rookie. First time getting
Musgrave.
Real playing time.
Jesus, I just said the wrong name. Luke Musgrave, and also Michael Mayer has been getting more and more involved. And if we like the Raiders going forward, I think they're going to involve him more. So, potentially by the end of the year, there could be four rookie tight ends on the radar.
Yeah. Speaking of the Cowboys, free Luke Schoonmaker. Get another rookie tight end in the mix there. Then we can talk about a Cowboys tight end as a rookie breaking out a little bit. But no, that's not going to happen. Pat, stop me if you've heard this one before. Rookie. Just a quick piece of news here to get off before we get into some injury-related news. Will Levis is named as the Titans starter, so it looks like they are committing to him for the rest of the season. I think this is the right move. Will Levis is now one of your quarterbacks, Pat. Look, kind of laid an egg against the Steelers on Thursday Night Football after having a breakout first game, throwing 4 touchdowns, but still definitely the right move. This is a Titans team that needs to realize what position they're in, and they need to start evaluating a talent like Will Levis as soon as possible.
He looked much better in real life than he did in fantasy, though. Like, the Steelers were getting through that line pretty easily, and he looked really poised under pressure to the point where he took a sack where he shouldn't have because he was just that kind of chill and then didn't get the ball out. But he looked really poised under pressure. They obviously didn't let him take the shots that he took the week before. But for fantasy purposes, again, I think you're really just playing the matchup with him because I feel like if you have Will Levis, you've probably got another option. So, I mean, I think it's just going to be a kind of matchup game. I can't drop him just because I used my number 4 claim on him. And just the and just for the commission and that, I got to keep him for at least a couple weeks here. But yeah, and it's good for them to show that they're invested in him without kind of this looming Ryan Tannehill maybe coming back. That is a huge confidence builder, and I think we're going to see some good things from Will Levis the rest of the way.
Yeah, the Titans came into this year kind of just ignoring the impending rebuild that any sane person knew was probably coming. I mean, the season has not been pretty so far.
They should have traded Derrick Henry.
They probably should have traded Derrick Henry. Bringing in DeAndre Hopkins to me at all was a weird move, but I'll say this much. It's at least a good weapon for Will Levis to develop with, because if he was, out there as the starter for the rest of the year with nothing, look, Treylon Burks is hurt, with nothing but Kyle Phillips and Nick Westbrook-Akina and Chig Okonkwo, I think the development might be stunted a little bit, but at least he's got a vet receiver to lean on and hopefully help him develop and become a productive quarterback for them for the future, maybe the face of the franchise, who knows. Pat, some injury roundup news here. The biggest one, I guess, in terms of significance is Daniel Jones has a torn ACL. He will be done for the season for the New York Giants. A bad season, just continues to get worse for them. You have it noted here, Tyrod Taylor, we don't know if he's going to return this year. Tommy DeVito has not looked good.
Like Danny DeVito.
Has looked like Danny DeVito. They might rather have Danny DeVito out there at this point. Look, just a dumpster fire season for the New York Giants. From a fantasy perspective, just if you got a defense and special teams unit out there on your wire and they've got the Giants coming up, you better pick them up as fast as possible because this is just easy pickings.
The Raiders, 19 fantasy points in our scoring last week. That also they carry. They were my highest scorer in this week. But the one thing that I think this is going to be really, really interesting, I think they're going to have the first pick. How do they win another game?
They might.
I mean, they got Jacob Eason. Woo!
Yeah.
Like, you got Jacob Eason. Like, with Tommy DeVito or whoever they can pluck off the street, with the team that was already terrible, with either Daniel Jones or Tyrod Taylor, I don't see them winning another game. So then it just comes to the point where it's like, if they do have the number 1 overall pick, what the hell do they do?
Oh, they're taking Caleb Williams. I have no doubt in my mind.
See, I have no doubt in my mind. But then it's like you've got just a heinously expensive backup.
Yeah,
or if you can trade Daniel Jones, your return is going to get clobbed. You are going to get nothing back for him if that team's got to take that money. You are going to be lucky. And also a guy who's looked pretty bad this year. Obviously, he was a lot better than Tommy DeVito. I'd much rather have Daniel Jones than Tommy DeVito. But they are going to be in a real pickle here in the offseason. But for fantasy, you got to start Saquon Barkley, I guess. But besides that,
Besides that, you could not feel good about starting any Giant. And look, I criticize the Daniel Jones contract.
Owning any Giant.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Darren Waller, I guess, on your IR or something, but
I wouldn't waste an IR spot on that.
Just drop him at this point. That's fair. Look, I criticized the Daniel Jones contract from the jump. I did not see the value in a guy that just couldn't really throw the ball. I understand, still young, and you hope he can develop as a passer, and he showed some elite rushing ability last year. But it was just it was just a big gamble to take on a guy that hasn't shown much, promise throwing the ball, and now he's injured, and now you look at his contract, Pat, you talk about it like, they probably won't get a team to take this on. If he, say, hypothetically, if they wanted to cut him, but they won't because of the money, his dead cap number, if they were to cut him after this season, a cool $69 million. Nice. Not nice for the Giants, though. Daniel Jones is not feasibly cuttable until I guess the season after, in which it would only cost $22 million.
Which is still bad. It's so bad.
It's still bad, but you could eat that in theory. But yeah, look, if they end up with the number 1 pick, even in the limited action that Daniel Jones had this year, I don't see any way that they pass up on a quarterback. I think if they were to try and pull what the Bears did, which was be like, hey, we're going to stick with our guy for at least one more year and we'll trade the number 1 pick for a haul, I think they would get lambasted for that. I think they would get the entire front office puts their jobs at risk if they make that move versus just taking the semi-L and drafting a quarterback and sitting down Daniel Jones, even though he is expensive. Because I don't know, like you said, I don't know who's trading for that contract either. A tough look for the New York Giants this year. But again, just target the defenses and special teams if they're facing the Giants, if they're available in your league. Pat, sticking in the NFC East, we've got Dallas Goedert. Fractured forearm, reported about a 4-week recovery time, has not been placed on IR yet, even though that would match a 4-week recovery time, but we'll see if that move comes in the coming days. The takeaway here, I think, is that this could be Devonta Smith time. Look, you're not looking at any Eagles tight end to sub in for Dallas Goedert. I don't even know who the backup is. Jack Stoll, I think, is probably the backup. You're not starting Jack Stoll in fantasy, but for Devonta Smith, here's what's interesting. Dallas Goedert basically missed this exact same time frame last year that he's projected to miss now. Last year, in weeks 1 through 10, when Goedert was healthy, Devonta Smith averaged 12.2 points per game in PPR. Goedert then missed weeks 11 through 15, and during that time, Smith averaged 15.8 points per game in PPR leagues. So a decent, 3.5 points more per game. But then he kind of kept riding that momentum and kept going. The final few games of the regular season for Devonta Smith in PPR leagues, 31.3 points, 20.5 points, and 13.7. So the definition of a league winner if you had him in your lineup for those fantasy playoffs. And we could see after, what's been kind of a slow start for Devonta Smith here so far this year, we could see him begin to take off and kind of take the same path, I guess, that he had last year. So if you're a Devonta Smith owner, I think better days are ahead. Would you feel the same?
And yeah, even Nick Sirianni said that. He said these targets, aren't going to just be tight ends. Like the wide receivers are going to factor in. Julio Jones renaissance much. But man. No, I mean, A.J. Brown's going to continue to eat. And I think that was always Devonta Smith's problem, was that he was making these huge plays. Like when, in the first few weeks he had he had 2 huge catches, which get the points, but the targets weren't there, and so then if these big plays don't connect, then you're looking at bad games. So if he can get some more volume with that big playability, oh yeah, his prospects look great alongside AJ Brown, who obviously could get even more work, which is unfathomable, but.
AJ Brown, the one superstar player that's kind of just been backpacking me all year. So shout out AJ Brown. Let's get you some more work. But yeah, it's been a tough start for Devonta Smith and for his fantasy owners. Seems like better days might be ahead at the unfortunate expense of Dallas Goedert. Pat, some big wide receiver news here as well. The severity of it TBD. But look, although the Bengals looked pretty good again, obviously taking the win over the Buffalo Bills, Ja'Marr Chase is banged up, and his quotes were a little bit ominous. The first thing he said was, "I'm alive. That's the best thing right now." That was his response to just,
I say that
how
at
are
work
you feeling?
every day.
I think that says a lot about, his and your mental state kind of lining up right now, which is alarming. So him saying, "I'm alive. That's the best thing right now," is scary. And then right after that, he said, "I'm just going to support my teammates, man. Let those guys do what they got to do. Only thing I can do is get healthy for the team." So this is a back injury for Ja'Marr Chase. As far as we know, it's essentially just a really bad bruise, and if you saw how he came down on his back in that game, this does not surprise you in the least. I also think, and this is just a guess, that the sort of pessimistic and negative tone from Ja'Marr Chase here is because he's in a lot of pain versus this being like a long-term serious injury. These injuries, back bruises and bruises in general, are going to be the worst the day after they happen, and then they kind of start to fade away and get a little better and better as the days go on. I think Ja'Marr Chase will be fine. He may miss this week, so that's what you have to keep an eye on. If he's in too much pain or if there is something slightly structurally wrong, hopefully there's not. I think he could miss this week, but I don't think it's anything overly serious for the long term with Ja'Marr Chase, which is good because this Bengals offense is finally clicking.
They look great.
They have looked dominant, and even they even got T. Higgins back from the dead. He finally had a good game as well. So we'll see what happens with the Bengals here the rest of the way. Pat, some more injury notes, but these were not injuries related to this past week. These are guys that might finally be coming back. One that we know is coming back. He got activated. Kyler Murray is set to return this week. Good, because Clayton Tune, I think, might be dead after this past week against the Browns. I think Clayton Tune just got buried under the turf. So they needed a different quarterback, and that's going to be Kyler Murray. How are we feeling on how this Cardinals offense, and I guess I'll just say this too, James Conner potentially back this week as well. How are we feeling about this Cardinals offense going forward with Kyler? Do you think they get back on track right away to what we're used to? You think it's Hollywood Brown to the moon, or is this going to be a bit of a slower build-up with Kyler having been out for so long?
I think it's going to be a bit of a slower burn, but I feel like Kyler's baseline is kind of what they were getting out of Josh Dobbs, and that's a really low bar. So you look at it from the perspective where it's he's going to do more than Josh Dobbs did. And we saw Hollywood, he's been pretty consistent, and James Conner was great. So for James Conner, I think you're going to plug him right back into your lineup.
He's coming back at a perfect time to a Kyler Murray-led offense.
Well, that's the thing, with especially how bad Keontae Ingram looked last week, and, DeMercado being injured, our boy. But... yeah, I think if you're looking in terms of fantasy viability, again, Kyler's kind of going to be one of these low-end QB ones. Worried about how much he's going to run, because obviously that was one of, he's a passer too, but that was one of his biggest things, was that he was so effective as a runner. I don't know if we're going to see that, but just the way I see it is I like him. I like James Conner. I like Hollywood Brown. I love Trey McBride. I think this is going to be great for him.
Yeah, I think what's funny, and just looking at an NFL perspective and kind of back to the draft a little bit, look, the Cardinals are 1-8 right now. Kyler Murray and James Conner coming back may be enough to take them out of number one pick sort of discussion.
Well, that's what I'm saying in terms of the Giants. I think that there's an open path for the Giants to get this number one pick.
Yeah, so I think that's probably going to end up transpiring. I'm trying to think of what the top of the draft would sort of be. But the Cardinals, look, they may play themselves into a top pick here, although the only difference is, the Cardinals could play themselves out of a top pick because the teams they're playing coming up as well also aren't that good. You've got this week the Falcons, Artie Smith classic. Then you've got the Texans, who they'll probably take an L to because the Texans have looked good. They'll probably beat up on the Rams, who have come down, pretty significantly over the last couple of weeks, although Stafford could be back for that. Then you've got the Steelers. They could beat them. Niners will probably lose. Bears, they could win. And then Eagles and Seahawks could go either way. I mean, they'll probably get bodied by the Eagles. But if Kyler gets back to elite form, who knows? Going to be an interesting team to watch the rest of the way now. And I think it's an upgrade for the pass catchers. If you are considering starting Kyler Murray at all, I would say wait just a little bit, because that's dangerous to do. But could be a QB1 if you are really super needy at the quarterback position. Pat, beyond the Cardinals, we've got your boy David Montgomery set to come back, so we've got to think about how exactly this Lions backfield is going to shape out, because could go a lot of different ways. David Montgomery could send Jahmyr Gibbs back to the shadow realm, or we could see a little bit more of a split. What's your inclination on how this is going to go?
I'm anticipating definitely more of a split than it was. Montgomery's going to go back into his role of being, the early down, short yardage, red zone, end zone specifically guy. But I think it's just going to be on fewer carries. I just think some more carries are going to be allotted to Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's earned it. He's played really well. He has played really well, just going to show that Dan Campbell probably should have been using him a little more. But again, we've seen that this is an offense where you could probably produce, more so than any in the league, I think, at least off the top of my head, that could produce 2 fantasy relevant running backs. So I'm not expecting some of these colossal games, but I still feel very good about David Montgomery in spite of what Jahmyr Gibbs has done.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, look, the touchdowns are still going to be there for David Montgomery. I wouldn't worry about it.
It's a great offense. Yeah, they're gonna be on the goal line.
Yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs owners will be the ones that are, maybe sweating a little bit just to see exactly what his touch count looks like. But yeah, I think he's earned, definitely more work than what he had when Montgomery went down. And then finally, Khalil Herbert sticking in that same division. Deonta Foreman been a little bit underwhelming, so I think Khalil Herbert could take this job back if he is fully healthy. Obviously, Foreman had that one massive game, but Herbert probably definitely the better all-around back and likely to take this job. Roshan Johnson's basically out of the picture. Darrington Evans, I think, jumped him on the depth chart. So kind of says all you need to know about Roshan, at least at this moment in time. I'm optimistic for him in the future, but not a fantasy factor right now. So Khalil Herbert, another guy that it's probably, if you own him, unless you're really desperate at running back, give it a week and see how many touches he gets in his first game back, especially on a team like the Bears, but you may not have that luxury.
Well, they've got a great opportunity because the Panthers have been porous against running backs. They are last in the league in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. So it's disappointing because I was thinking, I'm like, oh, Deontay Foreman, oh, let's go, but
the Deontay Foreman revenge game as well.
But the thing is, I feel like Foreman has really earned his way into more carries. Obviously, he was inactive for week 2 and 3 there when Herbert and Johnson were healthy, but again, like you said, Johnson was not a factor in the running game at all. Obviously, Darrington Evans isn't going to be a factor. But this is one of those weeks where it sucks because you want to start one of them so bad in such a good matchup, but you just don't know how the carries are going to go. And I was holding out hope maybe Herbert would need another week. He's been a full participant the last 2 days in practice, so he's going to be back at least in some capacity. And that's a Thursday night game, so you don't have a lot of time to really stir over that. What a Thursday night game! The whole slate is disgusting this week.
Yes, the primetime slate. We could just talk about that.
Hang on a second.
Pat, the fact these games didn't get flexed out, any of them, is baffling. I don't understand because Panthers Bears Thursday Night Football, Colts Patriots in the early overseas game on Sunday morning, Sunday Night Football Jets Raiders. Pat, that I'm sure you're looking forward to that one. That one's going to be a real exhilarating game. The Raiders defense might throw up some back-to-back bangers for you.
I'm hanging on to them.
And then Broncos Bills on Monday night. Look, at least the Bills are good, but ew, who authorized this? I thought being able to flex games was implemented so that you could avoid situations like this, but I guess not. So I don't know.
Al Michaels is going to die on Thursday night.
Al Michaels
is going to be in straight hell.
Yeah, he may have a tough time. Some other injuries here just to touch on, because a lot of guys got hurt all at once a few weeks ago, and now they're all basically slated to come back. Justin Jefferson is eligible to be activated, but it will not happen this week, so it'll be at least another week for Justin Jefferson. His exact timetable, we don't know. Again, we assume that the fact that the Vikings are more competitive than we thought they would be at this point means he will come back at some point, so Justin Jefferson owners, just keep holding out. It's just not happening this week. And then Devon Achane, who can be activated off of IR, the Dolphins are on a bye, so he's not coming back yet. Yeah. He gets another free little week to recover, completely, fully, even though they said he might not have even had to go on IR at all. They basically made the decision to, because they were like, yeah, it's probably in our best case. But I expect him to be fully healthy when he comes back and resume his role as a electric, not workhorse for the team, but, taking the carries that he had before, because nobody's emerged, Pat. Jeff Wilson has not been a factor. So
no, him and Savon Ahmed have really split that, and I almost feel like Achane's going to take what Mostert has right now, and Mostert's going to slide into that combined Wilson-Ahmed role, which might be enough to keep Raheem Mostert on the radar. But with Mike McDaniel showed that he trusted Achane before the injury, and why is he not going to trust him now? So I think he's going to pick up right where he left off.
Yeah, Devon Achane is he's coming. The only thing I will say is that his fantasy playoff schedule is pretty rough. We've got some tough teams there, so maybe temper some sort of expectations. But then again, he can make your entire fantasy week with one breakaway play that we know he's more than capable of. Pat, touching on some interesting backfield trends here as we do every week. We talked a little bit about or maybe we didn't talk about the Ravens. I was just I made a video about the Ravens, so I have them on my mind. But your boy Gus Edwards keeps putting together these decent fantasy days despite a pretty low snap percentage. What do we make of this?
That was concerning. Obviously, the talk is that he barely played in the second half because they were winning so convincingly, which I guess is a good sign because that means he's the starter. When Snoop Huntley was in the game, there was no Gus Edwards. So you'd think in theory that would make him the starter, but even in the first half, he only had 5 touches. His touch point was low. And, you can't bank on the touchdowns like that, like the way he's done. He's had 5 in 3 games. It's just been insane. But at the same time, the Ravens have been great. They've been a great offense, and they're going to give him options. And it is clear now that he is the one that's getting the ball at the goal line. Not even Lamar. I own Lamar in another league, and it was a point where I was like, all right, Lamar, you could, try one yourself here, buddy. And that's the thing is that, obviously, Keaton Mitchell came in, and he looked really good. But again, a lot of it was in garbage time. I'm not using a high waiver claim on Keaton Mitchell. I'm not using a lot of fab money on Keaton Mitchell, just because I think like at best we're looking at a pretty good committee. I don't think, if anything, I don't buy Mitchell taking over the backfield right now. Like, I would like to see a game with a normal game script. Just like a close game, which we might see this week against Cleveland, who is, obviously is a great front four on defense. We could see it this week, but Keaton Mitchell definitely is value though, because obviously Gus Edwards does not catch passes, and Justice Hill stinks. Like he led the team in carries and he did nothing with them. Like, I feel like at this point, it's almost surprising that guy's still on the team, but I feel like your best case scenario is for both guys is that you're looking at a committee, or you know what I mean? Like, well, I guess I don't know what I mean. I don't know what I mean to say right now, but I do think they both have some viability, just because Edwards, probably still lead the team in carries and get the goal line carries, while Mitchell is more of a passing down PPR kind of guy.
Yeah, I feel like I would spend a pretty high waiver claim on Mitchell. Look, I'm 12th in our league, so I don't have that luxury, but I feel like this being a guy whose name we had heard brought up as like, a potential stash, and keep an eye on this guy when he comes off IR because he looked good in the preseason. It's all these things that line up, and then now you have some production to go with it, despite what the game script was and the context of it.
Oh, of course. He still had to make those plays, and he did.
Exactly, had to make those plays, and Pat, I've seen the Gus Edwards Linsanity run before, and it always comes to an end. So, I think the 19% of snaps may be an indicator of that. But look, I think you're right in the sense that like Keaton Mitchell is not going to be this guy probably that you can rely on every single week, because at the very least Gus Edwards and then of course Lamar Jackson will be at risk of stealing the touchdowns from him. But I do think there's absolutely a world where Keaton Mitchell becomes the 1A in this backfield, and at this point in the season, you're looking for anything like that on waivers, like a guy who has both the talent and the opportunity to become a viable starter for you, at least on certain weeks. And I think Keaton Mitchell could be that guy. So I would spend a pretty high waiver claim on him. I'll poke around and see what leagues, he is available to me in, and or at least where I have the waiver claim to make that happen. And I'll probably pick him up. But yeah, I see what you mean, though. There's going to be a level of committee to this all year long, no matter how you look at it.
Well, the Ravens love their backfield committees. Honestly, before Mitchell came back, Edwards and Justice Hill were still splitting, which was frustrating. But and the other thing about Keaton Mitchell is we almost have the same dimensions. I'm 5'6", he's 5'8", he's 192. I'm afraid to weigh myself, but I think it's around that number. So again, he's not going. I don't think he's going to be a factor of the goal line, especially when you have a back as bruising and as imposing as a guy like Gus Edwards.
Yeah, totally fair.
And I've owned Gus Edwards at least for 1 week for the last 10 years.
I know you have. I associate him with you at this point, and honestly,
we're both Gus Bus. What are you going to do?
I'm sick of it. All right, another backfield close to your heart, Pat. The Jonathan Taylor takeover may finally be here. He played 75% of snaps, got 62% of the touches, ran routes on 75% of plays. Zach Moss, meanwhile, maybe fading into the abyss. Only 19% of snaps this past week. I'm sad. I like Zach Moss. I thought he'd stick around. And look, maybe maybe I'm panicking over 1 week, but the more and more that Jonathan Taylor gets involved, the more you're like, are you really going to take Jonathan Taylor off the field more than you have been this past week?
Especially they were winning this. Well, no, excuse me. No, they weren't. It was a close game, but games they're winning, you're going to want Jonathan Taylor out there to control the tempo. Games are losing, he's great in the passing downs. I said it a few weeks ago, when he came back, that I thought Zach Moss was going to turn into a breather back, but then the last 2 weeks I've kind of had to back off of that because it's but turns out that was true. We just needed a few more weeks than we thought to get there. But similarly to my boy Kincaid, all aboard Jonathan Taylor. I think, for those of you who were patient and, keeping him and, hopefully you had a decent record when he came back, I think that investment is going to pay off in dividends.
It's still hard for me to believe that Zach Moss is going to disappear completely, strictly because He's the number 2 leading rusher in the NFL, Pat. Still.
Yeah, it's
Still.
crazy.
It's Christian McCaffrey, and then it's Zach Moss, and then it's DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, Derrick Henry. So it's like,
what a top 5.
I know, a fascinating top 5. It's just like, was this really the most lightning in a bottle run? Was this the real insanity run? Or is there going to be some level of involvement, and maybe this week was the outlier? But put it this way. If you're a Jonathan Taylor owner, this week was encouraging because you know that this is the sort of workload that you could be seeing him get, and maybe there even is room for improvement. But at the very least, you're seeing his workload continue to go up, and that's what you wanted to see if you stash Jonathan Taylor for 4 weeks to see what happened. This is the kind of numbers that you want to see.
One thing, do not drop Zach Moss. I don't care if he plays 0 snaps next week. Do not drop Zach Moss. We have seen he is the number 1 handcuff in fantasy football.
Yes. Absolutely. Forward. Whether you're a Jonathan Taylor owner or not, you probably have to keep him on your bench.
Do not drop him.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Pat, the Seattle Seahawks, another back here that is...
gross.
Another back here that's had a very, very nice start to the season, much like Zach Moss. But Kenneth Walker, much superior talent, we think, to Zach Moss, but now... fallen off a little bit in terms of production and, more importantly, snaps. Zach Charbonnet out-snapping Kenneth Walker again. And as you noted here, Pat, Walker, not much passing upside and really, really tough matchups coming up for the Seahawks backfield to the point where Kenneth Walker makes me nervous because he's going to fall into that category of players that you do not want to bench, but you have to significantly lower expectations for. The defenses that they face, especially in weeks 12 through 15, which will encompass at least a portion of your fantasy football playoffs. I noted this, I think, either last week or the week before. Those defenses, San Francisco, Dallas, San Francisco again, Philly.
Yikes.
Really, really tough run. Good luck with that. And now if you've got a guy who is splitting work, it's tough. I think if you are a Zach Charbonnet owner, you can look at it as maybe like, you know, if you're in a PPR league, you could flex him if you're really desperate, or you just hope things keep going this way. He's at least some sort of asset now. But if you're a Kenneth Walker owner, given what you invested in him, which was probably, a 3rd or 4th round pick,
I'd imagine.
You're not feeling very good right now.
And I think even more so, not only are those teams good against the run, but I'm more concerned about that they're going to be losing.
Yes,
like if they're losing in those games the way they were losing to Baltimore, Zach Charbonnet is the guy that's out there in the 2-minute drills in the passing down situations. So that alone just kills a lot of Kenneth Walker's upside. But again, like you said, you don't want to bench him because when this guy's on, he's an automatic 2 touchdowns. Like this guy is money at the goal line, and he's still going to have that. And Seattle's still a team that likes to run the ball. So it's like, it's not that Walker has no value, but it's scary. Like I think he's going to have like more duds than a lot of other running backs that you took in that kind of same thing where we kind of expected Walker to be like a high-end RB2 overall. But I've got him in a couple leagues, and I'm worried. Would I start Charbonnet even in a PPR league? Not yet. Not yet, just because of the lack of the touchdown upside. And we've still really yet to see him put up like a really solid, like a really good stat line. So until we see it, but it's certainly trending in the right direction for Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, you're seeing him on the field a lot, which is really all you can ask for after that was not the case, due to both injury and just ramping him up to be ready to take on sort of a workload in the NFL. You're seeing better things from Zach Charbonnet lately. Maybe it'll translate to fantasy points at some point. Maybe it won't, but it's at least going that way to where you think it could be possible. We kind of talked about the Bears, Pat. I think we can move on from that. And then the Browns backfield just continues to be what it is. You got Kareem Hunt, you got Jerome Ford's coming back, and you could start either one of them basically, but it's going to be iffy at best. Talk about some of the pickups of the week here, Pat. I had to throw in Tank Dell here on the top of your list that you put together for us because he's still available in, I believe it's 45% of ESPN leagues.
Insane.
Any leagues where that's the case, assuming it's a serious one, because look, I understand a little bit that Tank Dell might not be owned in some serious 10-teamers, I guess, because the production wasn't there and he was hurt for a little bit. If he's available now, still, go get him because CJ Stroud loves him. We've seen the upside, and I think it's only going to get better. But some other pickups of the week, talked about Keaton Mitchell, Jahan Dotson, Khalil Herbert, Cade Otton, and Taysom Hill. We talked about Dotson last week, Pat. He had another good game here against the New England Patriots. So I think he is maybe going to do what I initially drafted him to do in the sixth round now.
Like I said, he could be a back-to-back league winner with just completely different trajectories. But it's really good to see him have a good week. He had a good week in terms of volume 3 weeks ago, and now to put up 2 really good performances back-to-back. you've got to love it because, like I said, in a couple leagues, I just took a little flyer like, yeah, he's got an upside. He was a high pick and picked him up, and I'm real happy about that right now. But the name to me on this that stands out is Taysom Hill. Like, it is so crazy in 2023 that we are still talking about this guy. But with tight ends still, if you're in a position where you're kind of streaming and playing the matchup, why not take the flyer on Taysom Hill? This man runs for touchdowns. He passes for touchdowns. But the problem is he's just not a tight end. But, you've got to live with it. But if you're struggling at tight end and Taysom Hill is somehow available, like, what do you have to lose? Like, he has upside that no other tight end has. Well, except Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith gets goal line carries as well. So him and Jonnu Smith are the only tight ends in the league getting these goal line carries. So it's just wild. It's just so wild that this guy is still doing what he does after years. These defenses can't stop him. He's just, I don't know what he is.
He drives me absolutely nuts because he's such a good real-life football player, but we do this every year, Pat, where at some point he breaks the game. And I remember hearing before the season started that ESPN and Mike Clay were considering a designation for Taysom Hill where he was going to be the first flex-only eligible player in fantasy football because these points where he is listed as a tight end and yet is doing things all over the field, rushing and throwing the ball, it makes him sort of a cheat code at the position. Now, maybe you won't call him a cheat code because, he's tight end 9 right now in PPR leagues, but the points that he's been putting up lately are just egregious. And Pat, I think they're more egregious for us in our non-PPR leagues because obviously he doesn't make his living on receptions. So he is juiced to the gills in non-PPR leagues. He's tight end 4 in non-PPR leagues, which is fucking crazy. Look, if Taysom Hill's available for you, I guess he's getting the usage that it's like, why not? I think, look, I've seen the Saints do this before where Taysom Hill is like super involved for a certain stretch and then just becomes significantly less involved. So I feel like there's always the risk of just the game plan in general changing. Maybe they get Chris Olave finally putting up the elite numbers that we expected from him and the Taysom Hill experience kind of falls off a little bit. But as of right now, Taysom Hill is as startable as they come. So if he's available and you need a tight end, I mean, look, it's gross. He's not a real tight end, but he can go in your tight end slot.
I don't
and that's
give a
all that
shit
matters.
He is a tight end in a position that's still not very deep. And this man had 11 carries this past week and 9 carries the week before. Just a chance. I won a league last year because I spotted Taysom Hill in the semifinals saying, like, I need a tight end, and I hope he runs for a touchdown. That was Christmas Eve, I remember. He ran for a touchdown on Christmas Eve, and it won me the matchup. Like, just with that upside. He literally has that, at least in the kind of upside, that no other tight end has.
Yeah, it's just funny looking at the percentage owned for, the top 10 tight ends in the ESPN fantasy database. Like, obviously, all of the top scoring tight ends are going to be in the 90 percentiles owned. Everybody's up over 90. And then you get to the number 9 tight end, Taysom Hill, who is 39% owned because we just kind of watch him do this every week and we're like, what do I make of what's happening? And is it going to keep happening?
If you're solid at tight end, you don't have to worry about it. That's the thing.
Right.
But like, if you're like, the league that I started Jonnu Smith this week, I still have George Kittle. But like, if you're kind of piecing it together, where you're starting like Kyle Pitts or if David Njoku, or you drafted Pat Freiermuth because I told you to, like, you're gonna need help at tight end. And again, 39% of ESPN leagues is wild to me. But I hate it. But I think, like you said, they talked about it this offseason. They have to do something. They have to do something about this. He's not a tight end.
No,
he's a running back. He's a running back.
We have this issue every year, and it's always annoying. It's like, I don't want to hold it against him because it's not his fault, but something must be done. Not my fantasy football. I won't have it. All right, Pat, we will finish up with our viewer questions. And let me trigger this because I don't trigger sound effects enough because I'm a bad podcast host, but I'm going to trigger this one.
We just got a letter. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. Wonder who it's from.
Yes, the weekly. I only use that sound effect and not the other one because I always forget. But we
And
have some
here's
pretty
the
good. We have some pretty good viewer questions this week. Starting with this one, says I'm not. So it's not really a question, but I'm turning it into one because I wanted to talk about it. It says I'm not one for vetoes, but Jefferson and Hollywood for Ayuk, Debo, and Rice vetoable. IMO. Hard disagree. No, it's not. The only, we'll have this talk probably once a month because somebody will bring it up. The only trades that should ever be vetoed are ones that are obvious collusion or are obviously extremely one-sided. I understand looking at this deal and thinking of what is the best case scenario for each side of this trade. And obviously the best case scenario for the Jefferson Hollywood side is Jefferson comes back and is completely himself and is one of the most dominant receivers in football, even with a quarterback like Josh Dobbs. And Hollywood Brown produces like crazy with Kyler Murray as his quarterback. Whereas on the other side of the deal, you've got two 49er receivers who ideally you wouldn't want to start them both, although, I mean, given their talent, you probably would. And then Rashee Rice, who has been productive in spurts but doesn't have the playing time. You have to look at all the possibilities. And the possibility exists that Justin Jefferson doesn't come back or doesn't come back full strength. The possibility exists that Kyler Murray doesn't look very good and Hollywood Brown puts up pedestrian numbers.
Dude could sprain his ankle tomorrow. Like, you don't know what can happen. That's the big thing. You don't know what can happen.
No, you don't. And like, I understand, like, look, that logic doesn't work for every trade. Like if it's Christian McCaffrey for
I've got one here for
Jakob
you.
Johnson.
I've got one here.
What is it?
So this is a league where this was the trade. Josh Allen, Austin Eckler, Mike Evans, and Christian Kirk for Jared Goff, C.J. Stroud, Justice Hill, and Kyle Pitts.
You could feasibly veto that one. I would understand.
One team was very bad and the other was good, but there also, because we knew this was collusion because there was intel, because last year when this guy's team was good, he reached out to someone in the league and said, hey, if you give me all your players, I'll split the winnings with you. Mm-hmm. So this was probably the same thing where this guy was like, hey, this guy's also getting booted from this league if you're listening. No shot he's listening to this, but him and his accomplice are going to get booted. But see, like in that situation where like there is no way, like you can feasibly say it with Jefferson because he's hurt and you never know, like with Debo's hurt and Ayuk's look pretty good. Shit can happen. But in like that trade, you're just trading a better quarterback, a better running back, and two better receivers for worse at every position. Like that's the thing. Like that is fishy. But unless there is collusion, no. I don't even honestly. I don't even like our league. There's no voting veto. There is a commissioner only veto, and it's been a long time since. I don't even really think it's had to have really been used.
I don't think it's happened since we've changed it to that. No.
Yeah. So like. Because at that point, you're going to be like, oh, this guy's team is good and he won the trade, so I'm going to veto it so it doesn't. That's not how this works.
Yeah,
like, you are not. It's not your team. Sure, it affects you because, you don't want to lose to this guy, but it is between the two owners. They have their own rationales, and as long as their rationales are ethical and there's no collusion involved, you've got to let the trade stand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, look, if for whatever reason in the trade proposed to us, this Jefferson deal, maybe there was collusion and they just wanted to make it look believable and they think one side's better than the other. But like from the eye test, there's enough talent going both directions that it doesn't raise any alarms in my head that it's definitely unfair. So you got to let it go unless you have like solid evidence that these two are doing something shady. And even if they are, like, I don't think it's benefiting one like a lot more than the other.
Yeah, I don't think it's that lopsided of a trade in general.
No, I mean, like anytime you see Justin Jefferson's name in a trade, you're like, but it's not anything crazy. Another trade question: should I trade Jahmyr Gibbs? I have McCaffrey, Bijan, and Jonathan Taylor. So obviously, this depends on your league and what your other positions are and stuff.
Is this a two-man league or something?
I'm just looking at the overall talent on your roster. Yes, you can trade Jahmyr Gibbs comfortably, I think, and this is more about. Obviously, you've got Christian McCaffrey, who just had his bye and is the best player in fantasy football. Jonathan Taylor, Pat, you and I both have a lot of faith in for the rest of the season. And Bijan Robinson, as irritating as he is, and as has the Falcons' offense has been, he's still enough and still a better fantasy asset than Jahmyr Gibbs with David Montgomery back in the fold, I think. And, so I would say you can trade him if you want and feel comfortable about it.
Yeah, especially considering like Bijan is your third option. That's wild. Like Bijan's your RB3. Like depending on your your wide receivers. You may not even have to start Bijan. Like, that's a sign of a really, really good team. So I guess it doesn't terribly matter, what you do with Gibbs, especially assuming with how good your running backs are. You might have a weak spot somewhere. Like, if you really need a tight end or you really need a quarterback, yeah, especially because we do expect the production to go down a bit for Gibbs, just kind of cutting somewhat back down to earth with David Montgomery stealing these touchdowns and a bunch of carries still. So, like, now's the time. Like, if you're going to trade any of those guys, you're trading Gibbs, and now's the perfect time. So send it.
Yeah, I would say you definitely have the depth to do so. Pat, this next question I saw in my DMs, and I was like, my first instinct was, what are you talking about? Absolutely not. And then upon further inspection, it's not that crazy. The question is, did CJ Stroud, this is a weird way to word this, but did CJ Stroud exit the Offensive Rookie of the Year race and enter the MVP race with his performance on Sunday? Now, obviously, you're talking about just moving on to greener pastures, because if you win MVP as a rookie, you're going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. But we'll look at this just from the perspective of, did CJ Stroud enter the MVP race? Pat, I don't think he's out of it. And here's the only reason I'll say why. Because if you take a look, first of all, MVP, generally a quarterback award, right? The only skill players that might have a prayer at this are Tyreek Hill and Christian McCaffrey.
But now's the year that might happen.
It is the year that this might happen. But the reason I actually, in another video, made the case that one of those guys could win it is that a lot of the quarterbacks that are at the top end of the odds have not been very good. And you're not seeing these, like, generational statistics from any of these guys. Like, Tua leading the league in passing yards. He's on pace. He's on pace to get up over 5,000, I think, still. But with 38 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. Could you give the guy MVP and would I complain? No, not really. But is that like you have to give him MVP? No. Tom Brady a couple years ago didn't win MVP despite having 5,300 yards, 43 touchdowns, and how many interceptions? I want to say it was like 11. So either way, better numbers across the board. You know who he lost the MVP to? Aaron Rodgers, who went for it was about 4,200 yards, 37 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. That was the key, Pat. He didn't throw hardly any picks and had a good chunk of touchdowns to go with it. Neither does C.J. Stroud.
Stroud's on track to break that record for the lowest interception rate.
C.J. Stroud's touchdown to interception ratio right now is 14-1. And so obviously, look, if you double that, actually you can more than double it because he's only played 8 games. You're going to play 17. Oh, cops are here for me. Sorry, I heard a siren. If you were to double that, you've got 28, 29 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And if he keeps continuing to grow as a player and maybe picks up the pace ever so slightly in touchdowns and gets up over 30 and still has fewer than 5 interceptions, I understand all of this would have to accompany at least a playoff appearance for the Texans, right?
Exactly.
They would at least need to make a wild card probably. But statistically, given how far ahead of everyone he is in the interception category, that being his lack thereof, I as of right now, I don't think it's completely impossible. Am I going to pick it? No. But is he in shouting distance of the award? Yes, I think so.
Well, I guess now's the only year, just because, like you said, Patrick Mahomes has been underwhelming. Josh Allen has been, his great games are great and his bad games are bad. So, like, he's inconsistent. Tua's been pretty steady, but that's not MVP material, at least not right now. I feel like it's going to be too late from Joe Burrow, who's looked fantastic.
Right.
And granted, he could go on a huge run to end the year and still realistically get it. But I think this is more so. I think there's a more likely chance that McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill wins it should they continue. I mean, if Tyreek Hill gets 2,000 yards, I think he has to win MVP. Like, especially without a dominant quarterback, I think it has to go to Tyreek Hill. I still don't. I think Stroud would have to continue this pace. Yeah. And the Texans would have to win a lot more games. And like we said, as we've seen, we saw him, go for 140 passing yards in a game that they lost to a team that has 1 win. Like, it's still not doing it for me yet. But again, granted, if he does play this way, he will certainly be in the conversation, which is remarkable. But he needs to have a remarkable, end of the year here to do that.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating that, like, somebody brought that up, and after, thinking about it just for a couple seconds, I was like, it's not completely impossible that we could see a rookie win the MVP just due to a general lack of statistical competition that he's had thus far. Texans at 4-4, playoffs, more than in view
Playoffs.
for them if they continue playing the way that they have. And look, all he's got to do is throw for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns every game. Pat, is that really that hard? Okay, final question here, and this one comes from just somebody I know personally, so I thought it was a funny hypothetical. Our pal Kyle Smick, friend of the show, says, "Who is the oldest quarterback that could still play?" Obviously, we're going to take Tom Brady out of the equation because he's old as shit and could play. Pat,
I'm getting older. I'm going older.
How old are we going? What old ass quarterback do you think could still play at a feasible level until he got sacked and probably died?
At 59 years old, Vinny Testaverde could easily still carve it up. I hate that was the first thing. I didn't read these questions beforehand like I do sometimes, but so like I'm just seeing this question now, and Vinny Testaverde was the first fucking name to pop into my head. Dude, how old was he when he retired in 2007? So he's 59. Oh God, don't fuck me now, math. So he was 43. He was 43 when he retired. I also thought of Brett Favre, but that man looked like a fucking mummy at the end of his career with his like that episode of SpongeBob when like Squidward got covered in cement. Like that was Brett Favre at the end of his career. So realistically though, like the only answer is Tom Brady. Like come on, but if we take him out of the equation, I don't know, Aaron Rodgers. Like
yeah.
There's a reason that guys are, out of the league when they're in these situations. Like, because if they were still able to play at this age, like a Matt Ryan or say, Phillip Rivers is 41. I think Phillip Rivers could still play at a somewhat reasonable level.
Yeah, I agree. I was trying to think of quarterbacks as well, and I was like, let's get Aikman out there and see what he can do. Get him out there for the Cowboys and see if Aikman can still rip and just what he's got left. But yeah, the answer is really
Troy
only
Aikman
Tom
is
Brady.
severely overrated.
Oh wow, you're gonna get the Cowboys fans fired up, Pat.
Tony Romo is a better all-time quarterback than Troy Aikman. Minus take rings out of the equation.
Folks, we're experiencing technical difficulties, and by that I mean I'm worried Cowboys fans are going to break through my window any moment now. I guess that'll do it for the show, Pat, before we get attacked by the Cowboys fans. Anything you want to say before we head off air once again?
No, I just drop a scorching hot. This is the hottest take I've made in how many podcasts we've done now, and that's all we're gonna say. Yeah, go Raiders.
All right. Go Raiders, I guess. Josh McDaniels, we've got a warm biscuit waiting for you here back in New England. I don't really
Rest
want
in
you
piss,
back,
bozo.
but I know it's coming. All right, guys. For Pat Gustafson, I am Brandon Carney. We will see you guys next week.